Hi, my name is Joseph Beige. I'm a real estate attorney on Long Island, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to thank our regular viewers. I appreciate all the positive comments, all your support, and as always, if you have any suggestions for future shows, please let me know. If you're a new viewer, let me explain a little bit about what we do here today. What we're going to do is, with the help of a guest, we're going to discuss a topic related to real estate, and with the goal being very simple, to help you, the Long Island real estate consumer, make a better, more informed decision on your next transaction. Now, today's subject, we're going to be talking about something that covers literally every structure that's habitable for humans on Long Island. Whether it's you're a renter or a homeowner, whether it's residential or commercial, whether you're a seasoned investor, you're a first-time home buyer, or you're in your dream home and you're not moving for 20 or 30 years. That's because we're going to be talking about water heaters. Now, water heaters are one of those subsystems that are kind of stuck, buried down in the boiler room. They don't get any love until one or two things happen. Either they stop working, or the property goes up for sale and a home inspector raises questions regarding it. And there are always questions raised by home inspectors on the water heaters. With the help of my friend, Scott Kolin from waterheaters.com, we're going to be discussing water heaters today. Scott, thank you and welcome to the program.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Scott, as I said, you're a friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time, and you have, I think, a great story. As an attorney who does real estate, but also some business, I find succession planning, when one family member turns it over one generation to the next, very difficult. You're a third generation in this industry. You got to tell the story a little bit.
Sure. Yep. Third generation master plumber. My grandfather started a plumbing company back in the 50s and 60s. My father worked for him. And then I started working for my father through junior high and high school. And when I was going through college, I was still working there part-time in the office. And once I graduated college, I started, I went full-time working for my father in the business and got my master plumber's license. And that's how it all kind of started for me.
You kind of skipped over the best part about your grandfather, because essentially he lost his job when your grandmother was giving birth.
Yeah, so he actually was working for a company, and the day that my father was being born in the hospital, he had gotten fired that day. So he came into my grandmother's room and said, "Helen, I got great news. I started my own business today." So
I think that's a phenomenal attitude. Again, it's off the real estate topic, but talk about being in, I can't imagine the stress of a new baby being born, losing your job, and to turn it around and say, guess what? I just started my new business. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, his attitude is, I would say, definitely been flowed down through my father and through me. I mean, just great attitudes.
That's wonderful. Tell me a little bit about waterheaters.com.
Sure. So waterheaters.com started in 1999, and it was kind of a spinoff of one of my father's companies before he retired, called Dial a Water Heater. And that company kind of focuses just on water heaters. He bought the domain name in 1993 before a domain name was, even knew what a domain was, or the internet was just barely even out there, and bought it for $50, $75, whatever it was back then. And in 1999, I took over and changed the name of the company to waterheaters.com. And we focus mostly on water heaters, boilers, gas piping. We do some general plumbing, but mostly the water heaters and the boilers.
Okay. Now, staying with water heaters, because that's obviously our topic that we want to discuss today. Everybody kind of knows what a water heater is, but I think it's one of those subjects, what people think and what they assume isn't necessarily in line with reality. When we talk about a water heater, what are we really talking about?
Sure. So in a residential commercial building, they all require hot water for their faucets, sinks, showers, dishwashers, kitchen sinks, things like that. So it's what we call the domestic water of the system. So it's our potable water that can't be touched with heating water or other types of contaminations. So typically it's been a vessel, a big tank that, flame or electric elements or heating it. But now with the new technology, there's a lot of different things out there, and we'll talk about those.
Definitely. That's what I was just going to be. My next question is, can we now we know what basically a water heater heats water.
Yes.
Okay. Now, again, there's subsystems to it. I know there's pressure valves, there's leads, and so forth, temperature controls. But talking about the different types of water heaters, ways to heat water, what are some of the options that are out there?
So the most common is the tank style, where you typically see a a 30, 40, 50, 75 gallon tank sitting in someone's basement or closet that, like you said, is pretty much forgotten until there's a problem. Then there's tankless heaters, which are kind of the newer technology where it's a small, almost looks like a suitcase that mounts on the wall, doesn't hold storage, but it heats up on demand. So that would be a tankless heater. Then you have indirect water heaters. Indirect water heaters, another storage type tank, but runs off of a heating system. The heating water would actually go inside the tank and heat the water. That's an indirect heater. And then some more common oil-fired heating systems have a coil that's inside the system, and it's a small couple-gallon coil. You don't see a tank or anything. And those are typically with oil-fired heating systems.
When it comes to, obviously, if somebody has oil, they're going to have to get an oil-fired, or if they have gas, they have the option for gas and electric. But determining, is there one system, or is there a way of determining what system works best for a particular household or a particular, commercial property?
So it all depends is the best answer, because depending upon what types of energy sources the building structure has, depends on what would work best for them and how much their usage is. So obviously an older couple that kids are all gone and it's only 2 people in a house, they probably don't need a large storage tank. They could probably size down to something smaller. Tankless could be an option where you don't have a high demand of hot water. And depending upon what energy sources they have. So that's kind of the challenge. Sometimes some people want a tankless water heater and they only have oil. Well, they don't work off of oil. So you would need either natural gas, propane, or electric. So a lot of times when we size a system for somebody, we really look at all those components, how many people are going to be in the home typically, what kind of energy sources are available, and then we'll size something and design something for them.
Okay. In terms of efficiency, and when I say efficiency, I'm not talking about the cost of running it, whether you're running, have oil or gas that's keeping it 75 gallons of water hot, or whether you're using a tankless that doesn't obviously have to keep boiling water. But in terms of efficiency, which ones tend to be best?
Well, the highest efficiency would be the tankless. Those are usually 90+% efficient. They do require maintenance and other things, but as far as like getting the highest efficiency and savings of dollars, the tankless is the highest. Next would probably be an indirect water heater would be after that, and then the tank type heaters.
As you saw in my lead-in, I did mention that whenever houses or properties, residential, commercial, go up for sale, home inspectors almost always are raising issues with the water heater. Sometimes they're very simple, and sometimes they're a little more complicated. So let's start with the simple one that's raised in almost every home inspection, and that's the lifetime or the age of the water heater. What can homeowners or property owners expect in terms of the life of a water heater?
Sure. Nowadays, 10 to 12 years is what we tell people. That's kind of how these heaters are designed, with built-in obsolescence like everything else in this world. So 10 to 12 years is really the life expectancy. Years ago, heaters would last 15, 20 years, 25 years. I mean, we've pulled out heaters that are actually 70 years old. Those companies are out of business. So they design them to last 10 to 12 years. Sometimes you get 15. We tend to tell people the most important thing is the age of the heater, keeping an eye on that.
And that was going to lead into my next question. What is the most common feature that breaks, that requires a water heater to be replaced, outright replaced? Is it part of the heating element that goes bad? Do they spring leaks? What have you?
Right. Yeah. So on the typical tank type heaters, there's usually a glass lining. Once that glass lining gets eaten away, the water starts attacking the steel part of the tank, and you'll see rust or discoloration. And if you're lucky, you'll get a sign that it's leaking a little bit. So those would be, certainly a major reason to start changing the heater. Either or they just break down, and the age of them, it doesn't make sense to repair them because they only last 10 to 12 years. So if a component goes on a heater, which could be an element on an electric heater, could be a pilot assembly or something on a gas heater, once it gets up in age, it doesn't make sense to repair it. So we tell people, put that money towards a new heater. before it breaks.
It makes sense because, again, by the time the heater and the heating elements, I imagine, are fairly expensive. So by the time you replace that, and then if in a year or two you're going to have a leak in the tank, sometimes you're better off. Plus, you have the issue about now when that tank leaks, you can have 30, 40, 50 gallons of water in your basement, your garage, what have you.
Actually, it's more than that because once the tank leaks, it's not the 30, 40, or 50 gallons unless you shut it off.
It's still being fed.
It's flowing. That water flows through, and you could have a basement full of, water.
Okay. The other area where I see home inspections constantly or frequently raise issues with water heaters have to do on the safety side, temperature and pressure valves. Dealing with the temperature, what are the things that a homeowner should look for in terms of the safety with the temperature? What does it do, and how can they keep an eye on it? Sure.
So the gas valve, which has a thermostat on it, basically, if you think of it that way, controls the temperature. And as they get older, sometimes they get built up with sediment and scale, and it can't sense the temperature the same way. So sometimes either the water won't stay hot enough or it'll overheat because it doesn't sense the water. So if that starts happening, and especially with young kids or elderly people, it could be dangerous. You could scald somebody. We do recommend putting a mixing valve on. And what that does, it's like an added device on top of the heater that mixes the water down, and it's like a secondary safety to protect from scalding.
For people who are watching, if they want to go down and look at their water heater right now to see whether or not they have that mixing valve installed by a prior owner or prior service, how would they recognize whether one existed?
It would be on top of the heater, and where the hot and cold come out of the heater, there would be like a three-way valve that has a dial on it. That's probably the best description of it. They can probably look online and Google what it looks like and see some pictures of it. Most heaters don't because people just don't put them on, but that is an important safety factor. And some heaters, like the indirect, it's required by code to have one on.
Talking about pressure valves. Again, this is something that I frequently see popping up on home inspections, that the valve is either the wrong size or the plumbing, or sometimes the pipe is sized down to fit, things of that nature. What does a pressure relief valve do on a water heater?
Sure. So back when water heaters were first put in, there was no safety relief valve, pressure relief valve on the heater. So basically you were heating up a pot of water that if it malfunctioned, it could explode and be basically, there's videos of it, of a water heater going through from the basement through the whole house. So maybe in the 20s or 30s, they started putting these safety valves on. So if the heater ever malfunctioned and overheated, it would actually just blow off through this relief valve and relieve the pressure in the tank. So that's kind of how it got started. And so as a safety, if that thermostat malfunctions, this device on the side of the heater will blow off and relieve the pressure in the tank.
Okay. Kind of like if you think about when you boil water on your stove, if you have the top on the pot and it starts to move around, make a little bit of noise, that's the pressure building up in the water heater. If you don't relieve it somehow, eventually you end up with essentially a bomb.
Right.
A steam bomb.
And sometimes we've seen people, the relief valve will be dripping and they'll plug it or take the thing out. You'd be surprised what you see out there from home inspectors.
And you kind of fed me right into my next question, which is what can a homeowner do when they look at that pressure relief valve to determine that it's working properly?
So you can test them. There's a little lever to blow them off and exercise the valve. Obviously, need a bucket underneath it before you do it. But they should be piped down. Also, by code, there should be a pipe coming down 6 inches above the floor to catch the water, so that if it ever did release itself, no one would get scalded by the water in the tank. So it would be pointed down to the floor. So that'd be one way to check to see if it's functioning.
Now, we discussed basically the heat limiters and the mixing valve, and and the safety, the pressure valve. What other safety-related things regarding hot water heaters should a consumer be conscious of?
Sure. So, along with the relief valve, a lot of older heaters don't have an expansion tank, and what an expansion tank is, it's like a 2 gallon cylindrical tank that gets mounted onto the cold water pipe and has a diaphragm in there. What it does is, when the water heater heats up the water expands and contracts, and this tank absorbs that pressure and takes it off of the tank and the relief valve. So it is code to have this, but a lot of people, for some reason, didn't put it on many years ago. So a lot of times when a relief valve is leaking, it could be high pressure in the house and not having an expansion tank on the system to absorb that extra pressure when the water heats up and it expands. There's no place to go, and it'll trip the relief valve. So,
and again, when we talk about pressure, just think about that pot boiling on the stove.
Exactly.
And that's what's happening. Okay. All right. Now, I want to start heading into a little bit what I call my tips and my tricks, questions. Okay. We've hit on a few of them, but let's start with the simple one. Typical homeowner, typical property owner. Okay. Maybe it's a landlord who's renting and what have you. Maybe they're conscious, of possible issues. So they go down and they like into the dryer and they constantly clean out the lint, or they, once or twice a year vacuum out the lines. They have their boiler serviced regularly. The water heater, even with when you want to come in to service the boiler, the heating system, that tends to get forgotten. It's kind of like, it's really unloved. But as a homeowner, what should they be doing periodically? And when I say periodically, you tell me once a year, once a month. What should they be doing and looking at with that water heater? Sure.
So for the regular tank type heaters, if they're 5 years or less, flush them out. You could hook up a garden hose. You could get and drain off the bottom of the heater. It gets rid of a lot of sediment, which keeps the heater cleaner, keeps the efficiency. The heat can go through and heat the water more efficiently. If it's 10 to 12 years old, I wouldn't touch it because you could be doing more damage to the heater at that point. That sediment on the bottom of the tank probably is holding it together. Also, the biggest tip is probably change the water heater on your time than on the heater's time. So meaning if the heater is 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, plan on changing it. Don't wait for it to break. We find probably 50% of homeowners wait for the heater to break, whether it be a leak, whether it be a flood, whether it just stopped working. And usually it's, for most people, it's the worst time of, it's a Sunday, it's before holiday, something like that. So if the people could be proactive, knowing that the heater's at that, past its his life expectancy, replace it on your time.
And the other advantage with doing that, besides doing it at your time and the convenience, is it gives you the luxury of being able to look at all your options, price around, whether you want to go tankless, things of that nature.
Exactly.
One thing we didn't speak about with the tankless is a potential advantage is it takes up a lot less room. Like you said, it's like a suitcase hanging on the wall.
Yes. So a lot of people, we've done many jobs just for real estate. Basically, people wanted more space in a closet. They had a 50-gallon heater in a closet in a small house. So for them, it was important to get that extra real estate in there and mount the heater on the wall. Some people put it in for the application, meaning, you have an endless supply of hot water. So you could take shower after shower after shower. For high demand house, the tankless could be a good option. So that's and the energy savings, because they are 90+% efficient, and they're only heating water once a faucet gets turned on. So all that energy is being saved for those times where it's not heating 24/7, middle of the night. If no one's using hot water, a tank heater is just going to keep coming on and off for the life of it.
Now, you hit on one thing with the water heater, essentially a tank water heater, potential issues. You said when a homeowner starts seeing rust in the hot water, things of that nature, or a spiking or dramatic changes in the water temperature. What other things should they be looking for that lets them know that, we're on the way to having to replace this?
Also, just the outside corrosion. Sometimes you could start seeing rust on the outside or the top of the heater. Some of the fittings might start getting corroded. And you don't have to be a master plumber to realize this looks like a potential leak when it's all crusty and starting to drip a little bit. So those are good signs. And also around the bottom of the heater, it's always a good idea every so often just to take a peek at the heater and see what's going on down there, but don't wait too long.
Okay. Now, water heaters, I know, again, they tend to be in the same room with the boiler. Many times they also thrown in a laundry room, so there's a dryer. Same thing, I guess, normally just keep dust away, vacuum around them, things of that nature.
Yeah, when they're in a laundry room, it does prevent It does create some more issues with the lint and stuff getting sucked into the bottom of the heater, which could be more maintenance, more service calls, because they do have like an air intake on the bottom. If it's sucking up the lint, it could cause the heater to go out sometimes, especially the newer designed heaters.
Okay. Now, let's think about, let's change our questions to deal with somebody who's looking at a house with potential buyers. And again, they're going to get a home inspector, but again, they want to have their own knowledge. So they can, first off, make sure they got the right home inspector, but also to go in maybe in a little more depth. What kind of questions should a potential homeowner be asking the current homeowner regarding the water heater?
Well, if you get an honest answer from them when the heater was installed, people's perception of time seems to, even if they're not being deceptive, we put the heater in, 3-4 years ago, and it was like 8 years ago. Best thing for them to do is take a picture of the label on the heater while they're walking through the house. And you could look up the serial number. If it doesn't have the build date on the heater, you go to the manufacturer's website and you can look up that serial number, and it'll tell you what year the heater was built. And at least you have some real idea of when that heater, if you have to start planning for it sooner than later to replace it.
Okay. Right. So if they tell you it's a 3-year-old heater and you can see that the build date was 15 years ago, it didn't sit in a storage facility or a warehouse for 15 years.
Most likely not. Yeah. Maybe a year, but so checking the date of the build date, and usually within a year of that date is when the heater was probably installed. So that should start the clock ticking on when you should plan on taking care of that.
Excellent. And as far as the tankless heaters, anything about those that potential homeowners should know about, or are they pretty much either they work or they don't work type?
Well, they do require maintenance. So if they ask the previous homeowners if they did maintenance, unfortunately, a lot of plumbers will put these heaters in and not explain to the homeowners that they do require annual service, flushing out the heat exchanger, more so than a regular tank heater. There's a lot more components inside the tankless. So it's really important to maintain that maintenance. So they might want to ask the homeowner if there's any service records of it, who the company was, So those would be good questions to ask.
Just as if you were buying a used car, you want proof that it was being serviced regularly.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Last one we're going to hit you with on this, and that's going to be the indirect water heaters, because we've hit the tankless, we've hit the traditional tank one. Where does the indirect fall in terms of maintenance?
Basically maintenance free. There's nothing really to clean on those. And that's why I think they're a great option for a lot of people if you have a heating system that's a hot water based heating system, because that'll be able to heat this indirect. Steam systems, heating systems don't work, and hot air systems won't heat these. So it's also kind of a specific to depending on what kind of system you have in the house existing. Okay. But they work. It could be heated by oil, gas, propane. Doesn't matter what heats your heating system. The indirect is kind of independent of that. It just circulates hot water through a coil inside of it.
Gotcha. So if you have baseboard hot water heat, regardless of how you heat that hot water, then an indirect is an option for you. And in terms of maintenance, it's essentially maintenance free at that point.
Pretty much maintenance free. And they do produce a lot more hot water, and they're more efficient to run than a tank heater because you're using your heating system, which is typically about 82%, 85% efficiency, whereas a regular tank water heater is about 62%.
Gotcha.
So you're using your heating system year round to heat the hot water. So it's a more efficient system to heat the hot water.
Great. Scott, we're going to have your information up on the web, on the video. Obviously, if anybody has any questions, they can reach you. If they have any, if they can't tell whether they have a mixing valve, I'm sure they can reach out to you. They can take a picture of it and so forth, and send it to you. And if they need one, I know you can help them with that.
Absolutely.
Scott, I want to thank you for taking your time to be here with us today and helping us understand a little bit more about, again, what I think is probably one of the most unloved systems. People think about the heat because they walk into a house that they're looking at in January, and if they don't feel the heat, they have questions. Water heaters really are one of those things that until they break, nobody pays attention to. And that can be false economy. It's going to be an inconvenience. And again, if you're buying your house and you're doing some renovations, you may want to think about replacing an older water heater, especially with the options like tankless. They take up a lot less room, and they are, say, 90% efficiency. So that's going to be great. As always, I want to thank everybody for watching today's video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you learned a little more about water heaters, a little more about waterheaters.com, who can certainly help you out in that area. Again, my name is Joseph Beige. I'm a real estate attorney on Long Island. My contact information will be at the end of this video. As always, reach out with any questions you have on this or any other real estate related subject. Any suggestions for future programming, love to hear them. Thank you.